From the Multiply family of churches, we are Behind Open Doors, a podcast designed to take you behind the scenes, discovering what it takes to multiply disciples, leaders, and new churches. We are located in the U.S., the Hampton Roads region of Virginia. Visit us at multiplythechurch.com. My name is Caleb Dininny, Executive Director of the Multiply family of churches, and I'm joined by my co-laborer, fellow pastor, one who's like a brother to me, Caleb Dininny, who is the lead pastor of one of our churches in our family called Little Creek Church. What's up, Caleb?
Hey.
Welcome back to the Bod Pod.
Yes, glad to be here.
It's been a while, but we're definitely glad you've returned. And, of course, Susan Murphy is with us today. Once again, we got two in a row for, I think we can now call you a regular guest, and maybe even like getting to the point of guest host on the Bod Pod, Susan.
Oh, exciting.
Yes.
I'm happy to be here.
Indeed. And, man, it's good to have you guys in today. You know, we've really set out this season here at Behind Open Doors to zero in on helping to multiply you, the listener, your disciple-making efforts in a manner of sitting back with a cup of coffee or tea of your choosing, whichever one you like, and inviting you into a conversation about things that matter. So in that, we ultimately want to multiply the heart of God, because we believe that's what truly matters in the Christian life. And so we're going to talk about what matters today, as it were. And before we get into that, though, just a little bit more of a further intro here. You know, Susan, you've been on a few times now, and I think that people don't fully understand like your connection necessarily to Multiply, because for some of our folks, they've maybe never even seen you before in our churches or whatever. But Susan, you played a big role in helping get a lot of family ministry things moving and codified and being able to be multiplied at our church at OV when you were here in the flesh and present several years ago. And then Susan moved up to Maryland as her husband is in the Navy and took a role up in DC. And so just kind of paint a picture of what you're doing now for Multiply and what that looks like for you, Susan.
Well, I serve as the Director of Communication for Multiply, the whole deal. Try and work with each component of our family of churches as they need me or need my help. I do a lot of proofreading, a lot of editing, a lot of content creation, and fortunately, thankfully, in there for a lot of the brainstorming and thinking through a lot of the people things that we do and what those should look like. I've done a lot of counseling for our members and family, and I think that's it.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I think in all of that, the reason that you're on this thing with us is you're one of my favorite conversationalists. Like, we've always had just really great conversations together. You contribute a lot of thought to the different conversations that we have. And so, yeah, I'm excited to have you, your voice into this again today.
Me too. Thanks.
Caleb, your claim to fame on the Bod Pod is what? Because I know you're going to get it out there at some point. So
I was not going to say anything, but if you're asking,
I'm going to ask.
All right. Ahead. Well, then, I believe that we have the highest ratings when I'm on the Bod Pod. It's no accident.
Yeah, is that true?
Really, all it is I just sit there and watch it over or listen to it over.
Listen to yourself.
Over. Yeah, just kidding. I've never actually listened to it.
Yeah, but it was episode 3, I believe.
I think so.
We did. That was the spiritual gifts episode.
Right.
You, me, and John. And for some reason, in all seriousness, like that thing went crazy. Like, it's about Robbie. What is it? Like 5 times more than all the other ones?
Roughly,
yeah.
So about 5 million views or listens.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
Right. Man,
Definitely.
that's a lot of ears.
That's
hearing.
yeah.
It's like 10 million ears.
That's like it's for some people. Oh man.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
The
good. man.
It's the closest thing I'll ever get to going viral, I think.
Right. Yeah. So let's see. This is actually why I brought you back on, because this is the test. Like, we're gonna
Right.
actually see if it's you.
Right.
That is what does this, and it'll be hilarious if it is. First of all.
All I'm gonna do though is everything you asked me today. I'm just gonna go back to spiritual gifts. And
Right,
Just,
just
like,
talk about the
and just
same
talk about the same exact thing. Like,
Right.
I've got a script.
Right. That's a good idea. A good plan.
Actually, I have no idea. I forget totally what we talked about.
It was that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know. That was all kinds of theories go into that. Either way, people liked it. And
Yeah.
no, I'm glad you're back on, man. It's
to
always good. You're my second favorite conversationalist.
I was gonna say, there's nowhere to go from here.
That's okay. All right. Well, I think it's a good thing to introduce the topic today. And man, I guess it's worth saying as well. If you haven't set your notifications for this podcast, do that, because it comes out every other Monday. Right now, the goal is from now until November, the end of November, to do every other Monday. So set your notifications for that, because it will pop up when you wake up in the morning. You'll be like, oh, sweet, a new Behind Open Doors podcast to listen to. So subscribe, tell your friends to subscribe, and leave comments and like us. If you leave negative comments, we're not going to like that, but so positive thoughts, positive vibes only. And but we really do want to see this content sort of spread out there, certainly within our region and our family of churches, but even beyond that. I know we've got listeners all over the place, and so we welcome you in today as we talk about family matters. And I was watching probably live sports of some sort in the last couple months, and there's a commercial out there that came out from Progressive about listening to your TV dad. And I love that commercial, because on that commercial is one Carl Winslow, who was the TV dad in the show Family Matters back in the day, back in the, I guess, late 80s, early 90s. And I don't know about you guys, but I loved that show. And I don't know what it was. I've always had an interest in other cultures. So I think a black family in Chicago, and he was a police officer, which there's some really powerful episodes in there about that. And I remember that affecting my heart when I would watch those shows. I loved Family Matters, and it wasn't just about Jaleel White, Urkel. Like, it's to me, in all seriousness, that's almost like an afterthought in the show, because I loved that family dynamic in the show, and again, I loved kind of learning how other families live their lives in different places, and at least as real as you can make it on TV. Family Matters, guys. Where are we at on Family Matters?
I thought it was wonderful. I want to let Susan comment on it, and then I've got a few that I'm going to rattle off to see if we remember those ones.
Okay.
Because there was a better era of television than the 90s sitcom, and so I want to just
So true.
Yeah.
That late 80s, early 90s sitcoms. Yeah. So
Susan, what Family Matters? What do you think?
So fun. It's great. Did you know that it's a spinoff?
What?
I don't think I knew that.
I knew I could stump you guys eventually.
Yeah, I was young when that show
was-
came out. So
It was a spinoff from Perfect Strangers.
which was another great show.
Yes.
I
Yeah,
love with
and
Balky and
Yes.
Cousin
and
Larry.
Yes. And so they worked at a newspaper, right? And the elevator operator is Harriet Winslow.
Wow, that is super cool. I did not know that.
How about that?
Huh.
Yeah.
So Chicago was like the centerpiece of American sitcom back in those days, I reckon.
Yeah.
Yes.
Man,
It really was.
that's really cool.
When I say
Not to take away from my own love of Family Matters, but just to make sure you know that.
Yeah. No,
so
that's great.
when I say I want everyone, if you're listening, close your eyes. When I say these four letters, you're going to be, especially if you're in your late 30s, 40s, 50s, TGIF.
Yeah.
Come on now.
Yes.
Just start
Yes.
rattling off the sitcoms. And here, I got one for you. Step by Step.
yes.
That was a good one.
Oh,
That was a good one.
yes.
Yeah.
That was with the dude from Dallas. I forget his name, but yeah, that was a good one. That was about a blended family, you know, and which the different dynamics. You know, Susan Summers.
Yeah, Suzanne Summers,
Suzanne Summers, yeah.
Duffy was the other guy's name. Paul Duffy or something.
Patrick Duffy.
Patrick Duffy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just the guy from Dallas.
The guy from Dallas. Yeah.
Right. That guy.
But then you had Boy Meets World. Boy Meets World was a good one.
Topanga was my girl. Everyone's girl that was my age back in those days, I guess.
I always wanted an older brother like Eric.
Yeah.
Instead, I got a different one. But my older brother was more like Corey, actually. but yeah, any others? Mr. Feeney was my favorite character on the show.
Yeah, he was such a wise sage.
Yep.
Yeah, that was always
maybe that's why I went to be a teacher, was because I thought someday I'd be him.
Yeah, well, you weren't.
I wasn't.
Man, I mean, I don't think it was on TGIF, but of course, you know, Full House was all the rage.
That was Sunday
in
night.
those days. That was Sunday night with America's Funniest Home Videos and all.
And you know what's fantastic is how all of these are coming back with like there's now a Girl Meets World,
yeah.
and it has Corey and Topanga's daughter is the main character, But my kids watch these shows, by the way, and they prefer Boy Meets World over Girl Meets World. Like, it's so funny. They prefer Full House over Fuller House. Like, you can't top the '90s writing, and part of the reason why is because it hadn't lost the wholesome value yet. Like a lot of that, you know, there was still some wholesome, and you had the strings at the end of every episode. Like the strings would come in like as the background music, you know, oh, good big points happening here. You know, this is the teaching lesson of the sitcom.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah. Dinosaurs was another one. Stupid show. Weird. Anyway, all right. Well,
not the mama.
Yeah, not the mama. Let's dive in here to this topic, family matters, because you know, I think you're right. What those sitcoms did, whether it was Step by Step, Full House, Family Matters itself, there was a championing of the family in those days that was healthy and good, even though the family might be messed up, which was kind of what a lot of them presented.
And there's a diversity in family too, like the types of family.
Right. Yeah. So I think that that today things are very different. It almost feels like every single show today has some sort of agenda and then a storyline. You know what I mean? To support that agenda. And it doesn't have to be agendas we just disagree with. It's just like it doesn't present sort of that universal, like, you know, family-centric kind of thing that was really important in the early days. And, you know, here we are sounding very old at this point to be able to saying all this stuff. But I think though, there's a lament in this that something is lost or something is being lost.
Yeah.
In these days. And so, you know, this topic came up just because just last week there was a Pride March in New York where during the march, one of the chants that they were chanting was, "We're here, we're queer, and we're coming for your children." And I was so struck by that. It wasn't a surprise, but it was like, okay, we're here now. We're here as a culture, as a society, and I think it's time for Christians to start not speaking against this, though we should at some level. This kind of mentality that the bully is coming after my family, right? It's more so about like what is good, what is right, what is true. I mean, what is back to this sort of wholesome approach to family is kind of what we would say in our culture, but what we would argue as Christians is what is the biblical foundation for this? How do we just present something that is God's design and and just present that for what it is, and allow people to see and maybe long for something that in their heart deep down they actually miss, or wish was in our, with people our age back in those days, wish we could kind of get back to that. What we're saying is it's never left. Honestly, it maybe has left the big screen or left the Friday nights on TV, but it's something that is important for us as Christians, is to see the family as really central to God's design for human flourishing, right? So before we get into some of the sort of the theology and practice of this, any more thoughts as we sort of frame up the topic of family matters today?
Well, I don't want you to get in trouble, so I am going to just specify that was said specifically at a drag queen march that was part of the Pride events
right
in New York City, and they were specifically responding. I think they do that cheer like every year, but they were doing it specifically in response to sort of a sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt kind of ironic use of words to try and rile up some more people. And so at bottom line, right, words matter. So let's not throw around words from anyone that we wouldn't want used against us or for us. And that was probably a poor choice to make everyone see things from a different perspective that wasn't really going to get anybody looking at another side.
Yeah, and whatever happened in the quiet or in the privately in previous years is now public, and I guess that's what I'm saying.
Right.
Because it's now more public, and because these things are more explicit, we too need to be a little bit more public and explicit with where we stand.
I was going to say a covert agenda for the last 40 years has become overt in the last 2 or 3 years.
Right.
Really. And so that's what we're saying is like we need to address this and not address this as I think a lot of Christians address it as what is wrong. We want to address this from what is right biblically.
Yes,
I like
exactly. Yeah. So let me do this then. Let me just sort of do a little journey through Old Testament into New about God's design for the family, and have you guys kind of comment in here and there as needed, but sort of lay some biblical foundations here, and then get into some more of the practical discussion here in a second. But if you look back into the Old Testament and the Pentateuch, the Torah, back in the early days of Genesis, man, God has always been gathering a people to himself, and specifically since the call of Abraham in Genesis 12. And so Genesis 12, God calls Abraham and says, I'm going to make you the father of a great nation. Right, and the nations will come and be amazed by this people that I am gathering to myself. And then he establishes covenant with him in Genesis 17, and then continuing on, what is God doing? But he's creating a family. And he's creating a family from a particular family, and that is the line the line of Abraham, who is the father of the Jews, the father of the Hebrews. Even to this day, they look back to Abraham as their father, and so do the Muslims, by the way, who is Ishmael's descendants. But so God has always been gathering a people to himself, I would argue a family to himself, and ultimately was named Israel after his grandson Jacob. So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons who represent the 12 tribes of Israel, and Jacob's name was changed to Israel ultimately, and that's where that came from. And so now the line of Israel, it comes from these 12 tribes, and one of those tribes was going to have something special. Was going to have a descendant that was promised that was special, and we see that reiterated or iterated throughout the Old Testament, and comes to life in a guy named David, who we are very familiar with, I think, King David, who comes from the line of Judah. And there's some beautiful books in, especially Ruth, who shows how the line of Judah was maintained, and then ultimately David comes from this line of Judah, and man, it's just a beautiful picture of God's providence and His sovereignty over His plan. So David comes along, becomes the great king of Israel, and even in David, we're promised that there is a better king to come. There is a descendant who will rule on the throne of David forever, and this 2 Samuel 7. Reinstitution of a covenant with David is pointing towards a promised one, and it's not going to be his son Solomon, who did rule on the throne and was the wealthiest and wisest king who ever lived. But there was going to be a better king, because ultimately David messed up, Solomon messed up, and we see throughout the prophets that all of the prophets are calling Israel back to the Lord. Come back to the Lord. Remember the Lord. Remember the covenant that God has made with you, because He is a good and faithful God. And so throughout all the prophets, we have this hey, come, don't forget your family. Don't forget the God of your family and who has established you. And there is one who is coming, who is going to establish this family forever. And we get into the New Testament. We get into, especially Matthew and Luke do a great job of just painting a picture of Matthew, in Matthew's case, just Jesus coming as the fulfillment of all of this prophecy and all of the hope that was going to be set on Messiah has now come in this baby, this Christ child, born of a Virgin Mary, and then Christ comes and he lives this perfect life that we were designed to live, and it comes from the Father as the Son of God in human flesh, 100% God, 100% man, that we learn later on, and we understand Him to be ultimately the Savior of the world, but first the Savior of Israel. Right, and ultimately the one who would bring back to the Father and redeem for the Father the family that was to be redeemed. And so, and we'll talk here in a little bit about what now Christ has established in His church by sending His Spirit and really creating this new family of people that are no longer genetic Israel, as it were, and then those who were kind of adopted into that family. But now it's a new kind of adoption. People from the nations, called in the scriptures, they call them the Gentiles, right? People like us, most of us that are probably listening to this, from the nations, people outside of genetic Israel are now a part of this new family once they believe in Christ. Romans 11 says that we are grafted into this family, which is just a beautiful picture of, I think Romans 11 talks about this olive tree that has a wild shoot that is now grafted in to this beautiful rooted olive tree that is Israel itself. But now it's a new Israel because of Christ. Christ is the new Israel, bringing in and ushering in a new family.
1 Peter 2, that once you were not a people, now you're my people.
Yeah.
Like that's
once you were far off, now you were brought near, and all those. Yes, exactly. And so that's just a beautiful kind of overview of God establishing His family and then expanding His family by inviting us in. That is the gospel, by the way, that God created, that we ran away, and that Jesus came to redeem all that that God had set out to redeem, and included in that are a people, a remnant, a people that are brought close to Him now because of faith in Christ, and then that He will restore and renew all things once and for all. So that's about a 5-minute sort of overview of the biblical theology of family. There's probably a whole lot more to it than that. But really that's what the foundation is, that God has been calling a family to Himself. So any pieces of that you want to speak into just from the biblical perspective, guys?
Caleb, go ahead.
Oh, okay. No, just it's a beautiful thing that our God has not just said, go figure this out on your own, but He's given us example after example in the Bible of what biblical family looks like and what it ought to look like. And it doesn't matter the context or the culture that you're in or the time frame of human history that you're in, that doesn't change. You know, there's just beauty in that. And so how it plays out can be different today than it was, in years past, or in generations past, or in in centuries past. But I think the biblical foundations stay the same regardless.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
Some of those are surprising, right? Some of the women's stories and all of this lineage of Christ,
Yeah.
we couldn't have written them if we tried, but God wrote them already, and we get to read them and learn them and know that the story doesn't always look like the perfect version of what you would think it should, or doesn't always look like what you think is going to work out in a certain way. But God has made it the way that it is, and that's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. So if you're listening to this today and you're like, man, I've already had my family. Like I'm in kind of years past now, thinking about family, or maybe you're younger, single, don't yet have family. Glad you are also a part of our listening audience today. But wherever you are in life right now, I want you to be thinking about how these kind of principles, and we're going to get into some practices here in a second, can really transfer into your own life, particularly of if you're younger, single, and looking towards family, thinking about what this looks like for me in the future. And then if you're older, kind of been through this, maybe it's some of the correctives that could be that you could help with younger people who are going through some of these struggles as a young family in a very secular culture now today, and reminding them, encouraging them in the gospel to be wise and Christ-centered in their approach to their family. Even if you didn't do that, it doesn't mean that you are disqualified from speaking that into people. You're allowed to acknowledge your mistakes and recognize the grace of God in that. Yeah. So I think that's important just to note here as we get into practices. Each of us come from sort of different approaches, but yet very similar because we came from Christian households. So just for a second here, let's just kind of talk about that for a moment, like a quick synopsis of sort of your family background, your upbringing, and how that has how that informs your view on family today.
Yeah, so I'm an only child. I'm adopted, and I was raised in Maryland by two working class folks who grew up in inner city Baltimore. And when they got me, moved out to kind of the country. I was raised in the United Methodist Church and got confirmed, all that jazz, and went off to do my own thing. Went to the Naval Academy, graduated, became an officer in the Navy. Met my husband, Patrick, in the Navy. And we now have, November, we will have been married for 20 years.
Yeah.
And we have two kids. They're 15 and 14, and those are not their names. And they're a focal point of what we're trying to do, because we're increasingly aware of the fact that we only have several years really of them being in our household until it's time to kind of launch them into the world as a version of who we are in our family, right?
Yeah. And that's good.
It's scary but wonderful at the same time.
Yeah. How about you, Caleb?
Well, I'm the second born of 5 in my family, and I was born into a believing household who consistently had us involved in church, but also involved in our community, and leadership was held as a high standard, if you will, in our family. It's something that has come with us and come with me, especially into adulthood. And and I went to college. I was raised in Pennsylvania. I went to college down here in Virginia and stayed, and met my wife while I was in college, and we got married while I was still in college, before my senior year. And so we have been married for 17 years as of a few weeks ago. And we have almost 5 children. We're about to welcome our 5th baby girl into the world at the end of July and beginning of August, whenever she decides to come. But we are, we have a pretty strong feeling that our kids are not our own. They are a gift from the Lord, and we are to be good stewards of that gift. And that means that we want to spend good quality time with them, but also just instilling the best Christian values that we can into our children so that they have a framework and how to live. In fact, as we're doing this podcast, I'm texting my daughter, who is at a sleepover, and she's asking questions about different dynamics and how to deal with things, and I'm helping her through it. And it's just kind of, we're involved parents. We are not, the helo has been landed. We are not helicopter parents, but we like to help our kids, and but then also help them think. That's the big thing, is helping them be decision makers and be leaders in their own right. And so, yeah.
That's good. Yeah. So,
Aaron, how about you?
I come from a similar family as you.
Oh, interesting.
You guys.
Actually, the same family. For those of you listening may not know, Caleb and I are brothers, actual brothers. And
I like to tell people my whole life we've been brothers.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Not yours, but my whole life.
Right. That's true. Oh, interesting. I don't remember the years that I was not your brother, but I coming from the same background. So I think for me, we were talking before we started recording, and I think it's important to note that when it comes to our family philosophy, you and I especially may have been raised in the same household, but we married very different people. Mm-hmm. And so that informs now how we view family, because we've now integrated with ladies who grew up very differently than us, especially my wife, who grew up in a non-religious home and some difficult circumstances in her life growing up, which, not that we don't all have difficult circumstances, but that she's had to work through and navigate through, that inform how we do family today. And some of the things, I kind of shrug my shoulders or roll my eyes at, but it's important to her, and I'm going to support that. That's a big deal. And it's a lot of how we deal with our kids that is maybe not different, but it's definitely coming from different places to try to get to a good, solid, biblical response or decision or whatever the case may be. So, I think that sort of the philosophy of family for me is definitely anchored in Scripture. The Ephesians 5 approach to husband and wives, and children and parents, where, it's important to understand there's a mutual submission going on here. So a lot of people in Ephesians 5 like to point to 5:22 that says, wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. And in that kind of patriarchal way, we sort of, with our mustaches in hand, looking down at our family, and that's not what that means at all. Because Ephesians 5:21 talks about submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. And so there's a mutual submission going on within the church, but there's a mutual submission going on within the home as well. And so my dynamic with my wife is very much like, I'm like the chairman of the board and she's like the CEO, like it's kind of how we operate, where she does a lot of the family stuff, like most of it. And I'm there to help and support, in that regard, and add leadership to the home. But maybe I'm a non-traditional Christian leader or Christian guy in the home, but that's how the dynamic works for us. So it's helpful though, because we come at it from again two different backgrounds, and so So it's good to be humbly serving one another, just laying down one's desires for the other. Like that's how we approach it. And so there's a lot of sacrifice that happens when, I don't necessarily agree with what she wants to do, but we will agree to disagree, and we're okay moving forward.
So where are you at on strawberry picking?
Strawberry picking.
Is that like we do because Katie wants to, or is that no? We love to do, like, you love getting on your hands and knees and picking out berries.
That's a negative Ghost Rider.
Okay.
However, I love that she loves it.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I love that she loves watching our kids do this tradition on Mother's Day where we go and pick strawberries.
Do you want to hear a funny story? I thought, because again, you are a little older and you have been married a little longer, that and then also with our own mother, she enjoyed doing that same thing, and I thought that it would be a good idea. So I took my wife to go strawberry picking, and she thought I was the craziest person ever, because strawberry picking for her meant having to jar it, can it, jam it, and do all the things that she had to do growing up.
Yeah.
And so she hates the idea of strawberry picking on Mother's Day. And I was like, oh, noted. Okay, we will not be going strawberry picking for fun. It will only be for farming purposes.
Yeah, for sustenance purposes. Yeah, and enjoyment. Yeah, that's good. So, so we sacrifice for one another, right? And we try to lead and support our families in whatever way that we can. And coming from a ministry perspective, we sacrifice for our families, we sacrifice for our church, and the balance of that can be difficult. And you guys can speak to this as well, but like you have a different type of sacrifice for your family in the military. You could talk about that in a second, Susan. But just the idea that I have to help my family understand that there are going to be busy seasons. There are going to be times when I am going to have to be away in an evening or different meetings that are going on, different things that are happening. I have to help them understand that, and even the why behind that for my, let me roll down the line here, 16, 14, 10, almost 8, and 5. Well, almost 16, I should say. And those are my my 5 kids, and just trying to help them understand their different levels, what I got to do tonight. I just had a meeting last night. I don't like evening meetings, but I had to do one, so I had to help them understand this is what I'm going to do tonight, right? But on the other side, I did that way too much early in ministry, and got to a place of burnout, a place where my, I was afraid of my family would start to really, catch wind of this work thing being all that I was about. And so I've had to swing that pendulum kind of post 2020, which was not about the pandemic, more about my sabbatical that happened, where I'm like, no, I'm not going to sacrifice my family on that altar anymore. And I think it's important to help them understand that. So you guys have some differing perspectives here on family life and work life and that dynamic. What's that look like for you, Susan?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of our listeners, and I definitely, I hear you say you have to go through the explanation of why you're not going to be at home one evening. And I think, well, one evening, okay, that's,
right.
That's definitely coming from somewhere for you. But for us, yeah, we're a military family. We have to sit down and have those conversations of where dad is going to be. For us, it's dad for 6 months to longer. And what that looks like to sort of shift dynamics, or when you're used to you're happily married and co-parenting your kids, or you can co-parent them other ways, but then all of a sudden one of the people geographically leaves the situation, and you're faced to be, the on-site sort of single parent, and that's a big shift to make as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks that are in our context have that experience with military life, right? So,
Yes.
speak to that very specifically for what's coming up for you, Susan.
Yeah. So, My husband's been in active duty for 24 years, and we have moved with him every time from anywhere from 6 months up in Newport, Rhode Island to the last 4 years up here in Maryland and 4 years before that in Norfolk, which were great because they were longer stints together. Um, and he is staying in for the foreseeable future, God willing. And um, our the jobs that were presented to us recently last year were um, it was abundantly clear that we were going to Bahrain, and we made all of the conversations with our kids, with my parents, with his family, to say this is what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and move for 2 years to Bahrain together, and that is coming up. And over the last year, after we've sort of told people and knew that that was our plan, my parents' health has declined significantly. And we live next door to them here in Maryland, which has been wonderful. It's been through the pandemic and other health challenges over the last 4 years. And so 2 weeks ago, my husband said to me, looking at me in the kitchen, and said, "I don't see how you move." And I was like, okay, yep. I'm glad that we might finally have like a same kind of, we might be on the same track here, train of thought.
Wow.
And he had actually had, unbeknownst to me, he had had a conversation with my mother that he already told her he didn't think that the kids and I were going to move. Then he was going to go to Bahrain and that it was all going to be okay because we were going to be here with them. And so we just went on vacation last week. We sat down with the kids. He brought it up to them and said, look, this is what we're thinking of doing. This is not about you, looking at the kids, right? They found things here that they love, and those things really don't exist in the same capacity in Bahrain at the schools there. No fault of anyone's, just it's a fact. But this is about our family. This is about mom's parents. This is about taking care of each other. This is about, some roles reversing, and we didn't know like when this was going to happen or how it was going to happen. But as an only child of her adult parents, this is the time that we need to kind of be digging into making sure that they have the care and the closeness of family and someone to kind of help run things, because they're not really able to do that as much anymore, that they need. And I'm very thankful that my husband said, I think this is how this needs to go. Yeah. How do you feel about it? And so he is going to go to Bahrain for 2 years, and we are going to stay here in Maryland. There is going to be some moving of houses, but I'm very thankful that he took all the information that he had and didn't put it back on me to say, I'm not sure about this. We have the relationship where I could have certainly gone to him and said, I don't know. But I've always been fully committed to what he is doing in the military and what that path that God has for us as a military family together. And so I thought that was what we were doing.
So how do we, I say we just sort of, as a community of faith, right? How do we balance or navigate that? If I could play sort of the other side of this for a second, Susan, how can you say that you champion your family, that you're about your family, and then your husband goes away for 2 years? How can you make an argument that that this is healthy for your family if you're not even going to be together?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's because it's a decision that we made together. It's because we have been through so much as a couple, as a family already, that Patrick and I know how strong we are, that we can do this. That God is at the forefront of it, that we are walking the path that he's eliminating sometimes one little step at a time, and that's what this looks like right now. There's going to be a lot of communication. Yes, we'll spend some money to travel back and forth. But that's what it's going to be. It's not going to look like we thought it would look like, but it's also not going to look like us just pretending that we're like, in two totally separate places for 2 years. We're going to
Yeah.
go over there. We had to sit down and say to my parents, that means we're not going to sit here on Christmas Day with you, probably. We're going to be in Bahrain
Right.
or
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah. And I asked that question too, because I fully, by the way, fully support you guys. And I'm glad
Yeah.
that this decision has
I
been
know that
made,
you
because
do.
I think it's important for you to be with your parents during this time as they are in their older age. What's interesting in this is that I think culture and just the way things are in our world sort of inform some of how we do these things as well. And what I mean by that is it's okay to have a biblical worldview on your family, and then take close to 2 years apart from one another and still be a close family. I think our resistance towards something like that, a decision like that, is not necessarily a biblical resistance as much as it is a cultural resistance. How could you possibly be a family and not be together, right? Well, for centuries and generations, this has been going on. I mean, guys have been, if you will, going away to war forever, right? And
Yes,
so, like,
forever.
or to hunt and gather, or to,
right, exactly,
or to go work, or
Yeah.
just something.
That was
Yes.
normal. That was actually more normal for families back in
Right.
in other days before this, and I just mean before modern times, really. So I think what I'm getting at is, let's not let our cultural worldview overstep our biblical worldview, that we could still be a strong family. And I would say even more so today. Like, he's not going to be on a ship, right? So
Right.
he has the ability, if every night, if you wanted to, you could actually see him face to face on a video screen, which is
Absolutely
crazy today. But that really supports or helps you guys continue to remain close during the time in a way that you never could before. I think that's important.
Yeah. So another thing too is it's biblical, but it's also just in wisdom, and that is that in order to make these decisions for your family, like decision making in general for your family, it's about self-awareness too. Like my wife is very self-aware of, she's has said, she didn't have to make this decision, but she said, I could not have been a military spouse because that's not the way I'm wired, but other spouses are, like, they're okay. They're okay with the time apart. And, my wife has said, I struggle with it. I could not have done it. But there's a self-awareness there of, like, okay, know that about yourself,
Right.
and be
Yes.
able to make decisions based on who you are. But you have to be able to know that about yourself and not pretend like you're somebody that you're not.
Yeah, we're not talking about something that's right or wrong here.
No.
Right? We're talking about something that's good and wise for your family.
For your family. And then being able to not let outside opinions that are unwarranted or unasked for inform your decision making as a family.
Yes.
Like that. Those are key elements, because you might have military families within your community saying, this is stupid, don't do it, and be like, well, you don't know our family, so, like, I really, quite frankly, I don't care what you say about, because Pat and I know what is best for our family, and that's an easy way of just it's a good filter, if you will, is like, but you got to have that self-awareness and that rootedness in who you are in Christ and who you are as a couple and who you are just as human beings, to be able to make decisions based on that.
Well, this is such a great discussion. I think a very helpful one, but we're going to go ahead and pause right here now, because we're running on a time crunch. We're trying to keep these episodes a little shorter than they have been in the past. So we're going to make this a part 1 and part 2 of Family Matters. So we want you to please stick around and listen to the second episode when it comes out. And we are so thankful that you are listening with us today. You've been listening to the Behind Open Doors podcast, where we take you behind the scenes, discovering what it takes to multiply disciples, leaders, and new churches. Let the word dwell richly in you, and may God multiply your efforts for the kingdom.